Toronto's housing market isn't just broken. It's been rigged from the start. In the last years, Toronto's housing market has slowly turned into a playground for the rich and a nightmare for everyone else. Once a beacon of opportunity, Toronto now stands at a crossroads. Its housing market, long celebrated as a pillar of economic success, has become a crisis that threatens the very soul of the city. But how did the Canadian dream of homeownership become a waking nightmare for so many? In this video, we'll peel back the layers of Toronto's housing bubble, exposing the hidden forces that have driven prices to astronomical heights and pushed countless residents to the brink. But more importantly, we'll explore the real human cost of this crisis and the innovative solutions that could reshape Toronto's future. By the end of this journey, you'll understand not just what went wrong, but how we can make it right. Toronto was seen as a city of dreams and ambitions, but for many, it's become a nightmare of unaffordable housing and crushed hopes. How did we get here? Let's rewind and uncover the roots of Toronto's housing crisis. At the turn of the millennium, Toronto was already a bustling metropolis. But what happened next would transform the city's housing landscape beyond recognition. In just 2 decades, home prices in Toronto skyrocketed by a staggering 450%. To put that in perspective, if you bought a home for $300,000 in 2000, by 2022, it would be worth over $1.3 million. But why? Low interest rates, population growth, and a booming economy all played their part. But there was another, more insidious force at work: speculation. By 2022, investors had surpassed first-time buyers in the Toronto market. Housing wasn't just shelter anymore. It had become a commodity, a vehicle for wealth creation. We saw a frenzy of real estate investment. People were buying properties not to live in, but to flip or rent out. It created a dangerous disconnect between home prices and actual incomes. This disconnect would soon reach a breaking point. In early 2022, the average home price in Toronto hit an all-time high of $1.3 million, but the party was about to end. As inflation surged, the Bank of Canada was forced to raise interest rates. The impact on the housing market was immediate and severe. By the end of 2022, Toronto home prices had plummeted by 20%. The bubble had finally burst. But was this the correction the market needed, or just the beginning of a larger crisis? As we enter 2024, the dust has settled, but the landscape remains treacherous. Let's explore the aftermath of Toronto's housing bubble and its impact on everyday Canadians. While prices have rebounded somewhat from their 2022 lows, they remain out of reach for many. But it's not just about the price tag. The real story lies in what's happening behind the scenes. Remember those low interest rates that fueled the boom? They're gone. Homeowners who bought at the peak are now facing a harsh reality as they renew their mortgages. With interest rates more than doubling since 2022, many Torontonians are finding themselves house poor. But it gets worse. The rental market, once seen as a refuge for those priced out of buying, has become its own battleground. Rents have surged, driven by investors looking to recoup their costs and a flood of would-be buyers forced to rent. But perhaps the most alarming trend is what's happening to those on the margins. Homelessness in Toronto has reached crisis levels. As housing costs have soared, more and more people have found themselves pushed onto the streets. The city's response? A series of controversial encampment evictions that have only highlighted the depth of the problem. What we're seeing is the direct result of treating housing as a commodity, rather than a basic human right. Until we address that fundamental issue, this crisis will only deepen. But it's not just individuals feeling the squeeze. The entire economy of Toronto, and indeed Canada, is at risk. With so much wealth tied up in real estate and household debt at record highs, the Bank of Canada is warning of potential economic destabilization. We're in uncharted territory. The level of household debt in Canada, much of it tied to mortgages, is higher than what we saw in the US before the 2008 financial crisis. It's a ticking time bomb. As we look at the aftermath of Toronto's housing bubble, one question looms large. Is this the new normal, or is there a way out? To understand what's really wrong with Toronto's housing market, we need to pull back the curtain and expose the hidden forces at play. Let's start with supply. You'd think with all the cranes dotting Toronto's skyline, we'd be swimming in new homes. But here's the shocking truth. 65,000 condo units in Toronto are sitting empty. That's right. In a city desperate for housing, tens of thousands of units sit vacant. But why? Enter the speculators. Both domestic and foreign investors have flooded Toronto's market, treating homes not as places to live, but as financial assets. By 2022, investors had become the largest group of home buyers in the Greater Toronto Area, outpacing first-time buyers and even those moving between homes. What we're seeing is the financialization of housing. Homes have become a global asset class, disconnected from local incomes and needs. It's driving up prices and pushing out actual residents. But investors aren't the only hidden culprits. Let's talk about policy. For decades, Canadian governments at all levels have pursued policies that have fueled the housing crisis. In the early 1990s, Canada largely abandoned its commitment to building social housing. Instead, it embraced a market-driven approach, assuming private developers would meet the need. The result? A massive shortfall in affordable housing options, pushing more people into an overheated private market. Zoning laws have also played a role. Much of Toronto remains locked in a single-family home model, restricting the construction of denser, more affordable housing options. This artificial constraint on supply has driven up prices in desirable neighborhoods and pushed development to the fringes, creating unsustainable sprawl. And let's not forget the role of easy credit. Canadian banks, backed by government mortgage insurance, have been all too willing to extend massive loans to home buyers. This has pushed Canadians to take on levels of debt that would have been unthinkable a generation ago, all in pursuit of the increasingly elusive dream of homeownership. The entire system is built on the assumption that home prices will always go up. It's a dangerous game, and we're already seeing the cracks. As we uncover these hidden forces, a disturbing picture emerges. Toronto's housing market isn't just broken, it's been rigged from the start. So, what's the way forward? How can Toronto, and indeed Canada, chart a course out of this housing quagmire? Some are calling for radical action, rent strikes, vacant home taxes, even the occupation of empty properties. But are these solutions, or just symptoms of a deeper problem? Others are looking for policy changes, upzoning to allow for more density, increased funding for social housing, and stricter regulations on speculative investment. We need to fundamentally rethink how we approach housing. It's not just about building more units, it's about creating livable, affordable communities. But perhaps the most crucial shift needed is in our collective mindset. For too long, we've viewed housing primarily as an investment, a way to build wealth. But at its core, housing is about people, about communities. We need to reclaim the idea of housing as a human right. That doesn't mean everyone gets a free home, but it does mean creating a system where stable, affordable housing is accessible to all. The challenges are immense, but there are glimmers of hope. From community land trusts to co-housing initiatives, Torontonians are finding creative ways to take control of their housing futures. And there's a growing recognition among policymakers that business as usual is no longer an option. The question is, will it be enough? As we look to the future of Toronto's housing market, one thing is clear. The status quo is unsustainable. The city stands at a crossroads, facing choices that will shape not just its skyline, but the very fabric of its communities for generations to come. This is about more than just houses and condos. It's about what kind of city we want to be. Do we want a Toronto that's just for the wealthy and investors, or a city where everyone has a place to call home? The Toronto housing story is far from over. As we've seen, the problems run deep, rooted in decades of policy choices, market forces, and changing social dynamics. But with awareness comes the potential for change. What happens next is up to all of us. The future of Toronto's housing market and the future of the city itself hangs in the balance. The question isn't just, what is wrong with the Toronto housing market, but what are we going to do about it? But let's dive deeper into the complexities of Toronto's housing crisis. It's not just about numbers on a spreadsheet or policies in a government office. It's about real people, real lives, and the very soul of one of North America's most diverse and dynamic cities. Consider the impact on young professionals, the lifeblood of any thriving metropolis. In the past, Toronto was a magnet for talent from across Canada and around the world. But now, many are thinking twice. The dream of owning a home, once a cornerstone of the middle-class lifestyle, has become a distant fantasy for many. Imagine working hard, saving diligently, only to watch home prices rise faster than you can save. It's not just frustrating, it's demoralizing, and it's changing the very character of the city. When young people can't afford to put down roots, we lose the energy, innovation, and community engagement that they bring. But it's not just the young who are suffering. Longtime residents, people who have called Toronto home for decades, are finding themselves priced out of their own neighborhoods. The gentrification wave that swept through areas like Parkdale, Leslieville, and the Junction has brought trendy cafes and boutique shops. But at what cost? Families who have lived in these areas for generations are being forced to move further and further out, disrupting community ties and exacerbating urban sprawl. It's a cruel irony. As neighborhoods become more desirable, they become less accessible to the very people who gave them their character in the first place. And what about the impact on Toronto's famous diversity? This is a city that prides itself on being a mosaic of cultures, a place where people from all corners of the globe can find a home. But when housing becomes unaffordable, it's often newcomers and marginalized communities who feel the squeeze first. So where do we go from here? It's clear that there's no single, simple solution to Toronto's housing woes. What's needed is a multi-pronged approach that addresses both supply and demand, that balances the needs of current homeowners with those of renters and prospective buyers, and that isn't afraid to challenge entrenched interests and ways of thinking. We need bold leadership at all levels of government. We need engaged citizens who are willing to advocate for change, even when it's uncomfortable. And we need a renewed commitment to the idea of the city as a place for everyone, not just those who can afford million-dollar homes. The path forward won't be easy, and it won't be quick. Undoing decades of policy choices and market forces will take time, but the alternative, a Toronto that becomes increasingly unaffordable, unequal, and inhospitable to the very people who give it its vitality, is simply unacceptable. As we conclude our exploration of what's wrong with Toronto's housing market, let's remember that this isn't just about real estate. It's about the kind of city and the kind of society we want to create. It's about whether we believe that safe, stable, affordable housing is a right or a privilege. It's about whether we're willing to make the hard choices necessary to ensure that Toronto remains a city of opportunity for all, not just for a privileged few. The challenges are immense, but so is the potential for positive change. Toronto has always been a city of innovation, of resilience, of people coming together to build something greater than themselves. If any city can find a way out of this housing crisis, it's Toronto. But it will take all of us, policymakers, developers, community activists, and ordinary citizens, working together, thinking creatively, and being willing to challenge our assumptions about what's possible. The question isn't just what's wrong with Toronto's housing market. The real question is, what are we going to do to make it right? The answer to that question will shape the future of this great city for generations to come. It's time to roll up our sleeves and get to work. The future of Toronto depends on it.